Happy Mother's Day. As I was thinking about what to do for this particular lesson, I think that it's interesting. We have the Mother's Day and then we have the Father's Day a little afterwards. And really there are not a whole awful lot of passages that have to do with a mother who is an incredible example. We have certain mothers that are, and we even have less examples of fathers that are, although we do have a lot of teaching. We do have a lot of ideas about what fathers and mothers should and should not be doing. But a lot of that has to do with how Christians are supposed to act in general and how we are supposed to behave. We discussed gentleness today in Bible class. And what we found is that gentleness is really supposed to be for all people. But when we're talking about mothers and fathers, I think what we're doing is looking specifically at, we are, as mothers and fathers, the first catalyst toward a good Christian moral life. And so we as mothers and fathers are really laying the foundations for that. And so as we honor fathers and mothers, we're talking about an awful lot of Christian ideas about how we are supposed to live in general and how we are to teach our children how to live and how to behave and what they are and how they can be people for God. And so I'm going to take a look at some observations from Proverbs. And as we do this, I want us to understand that there's really not like a progression of, okay, well, this follows this or this follows this. This is kind of like a Whitman sampler, as it were. And so we're going to see some things that are indicative of what mothers are and what they do, but we will also see how what is expected from us. And then we're going to take a look at Jesus as being an example of a son who honored mothers. So we're going to take a look at this in terms of Proverbs. And really what we have here, I want us to understand that mothers have a teaching function in the Bible. We see that over and again, but I think we see this in Proverbs specifically as we take a look at Proverbs 1:8. It says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They will be a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." And we see also in 6:20 something like that. "My son, keep your father's commands and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them upon your heart forever. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you." And it talks about these commands are a lamp, and the teaching is a light, and the corrections of discipline are the way to life, and keeping them is important. And we see that this is part of what is going on. But I want us to understand something about mothers very specifically. Mothers really, in a real sense, are the first teachers of children. And I'm thinking about how fathers interact and how I interacted with my kids. And yes, I did have that teaching role. I did have that function. But let me tell you something. My wife was the one that was really giving them more and more of that teaching. And it really happened even before they were even born. I remember her speaking to her children as they were in the womb. And she would joke with them and she would sing to them and she would do all that. And there's a lot of research that says that some of the things that we have tried in the past in order to make our kids smarter within the womb really aren't all that valid. But there is something valid about that voice connection, about that connection that they feel even before they are born. But when they are born, mothers have an incredibly important function in how they develop. There was an experiment, and you probably have heard of this, but I didn't realize necessarily how long ago the experiment was until I started looking at this. Frederick II of Germany, back in the 13th century, he was doing this experiment, and he said, you know what? If we just took babies, and they had absolutely no exposure to languages or anything like that, they would grow up speaking German. That was what Frederick II's idea was. That was his hypothesis. So what he did was he took babies from mothers before they were even just right from being born, and he put them in a place, and he started. He fed them, but they weren't held at all. They weren't spoken to at all. They weren't interacted with at all. And what they found is that those babies, not only did they not speak German growing up, they didn't grow up at all, they died. And what we know now is that holding, that touching, that connection, that talking, that eye contact, one eye to the other, as that baby can't even focus, and they're starting to look around in the second and third week, and the mom's talking to them, hey, and finally you see the sparkling glimmers of a smile, and those eyes start to connect, and they start to focus, and they start to see Mom. And they see that. And let's face it, the mom, as the one that is feeding that child and is holding that child, they really are the first teachers. The fathers are there for sure, hopefully. But those mothers are incredibly, incredibly important, and that touch is incredibly important. We know that there is something called reactive attachment disorder. And what that is, if kids are not held enough at an early age, if they are not spoken to at an early age, if they are not laughed with at an early age, if they are not interacted with at whatever level they are, even though they don't seem to be acting at all, even though they don't seem to be reacting at all, even though they don't seem to be doing anything at all, their brains are just super connected, and they're taking all this input in, and they are integrating it into who they are going to be. And if that doesn't happen, they end up with something called reactive attachment disorder, and they have a hard time making relationships later on down the line. They have a hard time connecting with people. They have a hard time empathizing and sympathizing and understanding another person's perspective. They have a very difficult time in doing that. The world is full of poor children who have been abandoned and abused and neglected and all of this, and this is part of what is going on. If you are a human being that is able to interact appropriately with your people, with your family, and with society, thank a mother, or thank a foster mother, or a stepmother, or an adoptive mother, or someone who filled that role. It would not happen without that mother. We also find that the teaching has long-term effects. We find that this is true, and what I'm talking about in that ability for them to relate to the world around them, obviously it has long-term effects. Obviously it has that. But we also see that even the formal teaching that mothers can give to their children has an impact. Because after all, that mother really is the strongest relationship that a lot of kids have. And that's the strongest relationship that they have throughout their lives. And it used to be a joke. I used to hear this in every single Mother's Day sermon growing up. You see these big bruisers of these football players, and they're there on the field, and they're tackling and doing all that, and they get their 2 seconds of fame on the TV screen, and what do they say? Hi, Mom! I heard that every single Mother's Day sermon in my entire life. I get to share it with you now. But that is so much of who that interaction is. And we see in Proverbs chapter 31, verse 1, and this is something that Tom went through in the study on Proverbs, King Lemuel, who might in all probability was Solomon himself. And it says, the saying of King Lemuel, an oracle, his mother taught him. And so these next few verses, what we have are these words that his mom taught him. And she was teaching him specifically how to be a king. He's teaching them specifically of some things that you need to know about if you're going to be a ruler, if you're going to be that way. So it's very specific to him. But we see that King Lemuel, he's saying, you know what? This is good stuff. I'm writing it down because it's that important. We see this in 2 Timothy 1 verse 5 with Timothy. And Timothy is told, you need to make sure that you're fanning the flame, the gift that God gave you. And you need to hold on to that faith as you were taught, that lived in your grandmother Lois, and it lived in your mother Eunice. And we know that Timothy, he did not have a believing father, but his mother and his grandmother instilled within Timothy strong faith. And it stayed with Timothy throughout all of his ministry, and to the best of our knowledge, throughout his entire life. And so we see this as being true. But the other thing that we want to talk about in Proverbs. And again, we're looking at these connections as being very tenuous. But I want us to see that how we act and what we do and how we speak and all of that is a reflects on our mothers. And I can think about this. My mom, as I was going out the door with a ripped t-shirt to school, Mom said, no, not in my house. I want people to know that you know how to dress. But we see this in the Proverbs. Again, Proverbs 10:1 says this: a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son grief to his mother. We see this in 15:20. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. We see this in 17:25. We see it in this where it says, a foolish son brings grief to his father and bitterness to the one who bore him. We also see it in 23:22 through 25, and this is probably the longest one in here. And we see on this particular passage, 23:22 through 25. We'll start there. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Get wisdom, discipline, and understanding. The father of a righteous man has great joy. He who has a wise son delights in him. May your father and mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice. And so we see what is going on here is as we grow, as our moms have taught us in the faith and how to be good people and how to be moral and how to interact with people and how to do all of that, we find that our acting in ways that are wise, in ways that show wisdom and understanding and discipline, we are a reflection on our mothers. And we have a responsibility to them. We take a look at some of these passages here, and I wasn't even exactly sure what to do with this, because it says this in Proverbs 19:26 and also in the 28-24 passage. It says, in 19:26, he who robs his father and drives out his mother is a son who brings shame and disgrace. And we look at 28, and we see in verse 24 something along the same lines. He who robs his father or mother and says it's not wrong, he is a partner to him who destroys. And I'm thinking about that, thinking, well, who in the world would do that? How does that work? And yet, as I thought about it a little bit longer, and I'm thinking about how fights over inheritance before the father and mother are even dead. What does that show? How does that reflect? What does it do? We have a responsibility to those who raised us, to our mothers and our fathers. We see this in Mark chapter 7. There's a situation in which the Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law, they heard Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating with unclean, that is, ceremonially unwashed hands. And the Pharisees, they question him about this. And they say, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with unclean hands? And then we see what Jesus responds. We see Jesus' response. And he said, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. And he says this, you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. Think about this, people. Think about how you're living. Think about how you are treating your parents. Think about how you are getting rid of what God has talked about in honoring your father and mother. And so it says, for Moses said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses his father and mother must be put to death. But you say that if a man says to his father or mother, whatever help you might otherwise have received from me is korban, that is a gift devoted to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition. that you have handed down, and you do many things like this. And so what are we talking about here? What was going on here is that a person would say, okay, well, I am going to dedicate this thing to God. Whatever that was. Put it in modern terms, or whatever else. You're going to say, okay, you know what? I'm dedicating that car to God. That's going to be God's car. It's still in my driveway. I'm still driving it. I'm doing all those things with it. I'm going to use it for things that have to do with God. Maybe. But it is dedicated to Him. What that means is, I can't use this car, Mom. I can't use this car, Dad, to get you to the doctor, because that right there is not the way that God would want me to use His car. That's what this Korban was like. I've dedicated that thing to God. I'm still using it. I'm still having all that use for it. I can't use it for you, Mom and Dad, because it's God's. That is not honoring a father and mother. That is not fulfilling the responsibility that we have to them. Let's take a look at Jesus' example, and this is where we're going to come off of the Proverbs, and we're going to take a look at some various things about how Jesus interacted and how he functioned with his own mother. And so we take a look at, there we go. And so we take a look at Luke 2:51. And what's going on here is this is right when Jesus is 12 years old. We've already gotten through the birth of Jesus. We see that he is spoken about. People have all sorts of amazing things to say about him. We have Simeon and Anna in the temple saying these things, but then he goes away. And then, every year, Jesus' parents, went to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Passover. And when he's 12 years old, he's there, and he gets left in Jerusalem. And he finds himself alone in Jerusalem, but he goes to the temple, and he's talking to the leaders there. He's talking with the priests. He's talking with the teachers of the law. He's doing all of this, and he's amazing people with his answers and his questions. They're completely confounded by what he is doing and how he's conducting himself as a 12-year-old. Mom and Dad, they get off on their journey 3 days away. They say, oh, you know what? Jesus isn't among our party. We need to turn around and see where in the world he is. And so they go looking for him. And they find him in the temple. His mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. And Jesus answers, Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house? But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. What we see is that Mary had something to treasure in her heart. And I take a look at that particular situation. I take a look at that imagery, and I see that all the things that Jesus did that brought her any kind of pride, any kind of sense of admiration, any kind of sense that, hey, you know what, I'm doing the right thing. Hey, this child is growing. I am conducting my way in the way that God would want me to conduct myself. And Jesus is turning out to be a strong, independent young man of God. And she takes that and she puts it in her heart, and it becomes a treasure to her. And so we see here, she asks him a question, why have you treated us like this? And he's saying, I'm not doing this to be disobedient. I'm not doing this to cause you trouble. I didn't mean to do that. But you knew that if you were going to look for me, you needed to look for me here. Where else would I be? I'm in my Father's house. And it says that his parents didn't quite understand what to make of that. But I imagine that as Mary and Joseph, as they're going back home, Mary had a lot to think about. You know, I was told that he would be called the Son of the Most High. I was told that this is how he was going to be. And so she's putting one and one together, and she's getting two, and she's putting two and two together, and she's getting four, and she's treasuring all these things up, and we see that Jesus himself is obedient to her and to the Father. And I'm thinking about if anyone on the face of the planet ever had the right to say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to do my own thing. It was Jesus. that's not what he did. He was obedient to them. Mary had a lot of things to treasure in her heart, and he was obedient to her even when he was older and starting his ministry. And we know that passage in John chapter 2 where Jesus and his disciples are invited to a wedding, and they run out of wine at the wedding, and we hear Jesus' mother, and she sees the situation, and Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Social faux pas. There's a problem. And Jesus answers, "Dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come." But then the mom says, "Do whatever he tells you to do." And it wasn't that Jesus said, "No, I'm not doing this." "Okay, Mom, I'm going to do it." And so he takes he tells them, "You've got these 6 stone water jars. These are used for ceremonial washing, and they hold 20 to 30 gallons. I want you to fill them with water." And so they filled them to the brim. Draw them out and take them to the master of the banquet. And that water had been turned into wine. And so we see Jesus honoring his mother, being obedient to her in these situations. But we also see that Jesus, even at the end of his life, was making sure that he was taking care of his mother. And we say, well, how in the world could he possibly do that? He was going to be taken away. He was going to be crucified. But we see that Jesus is on the cross, and this is in John 19, 25 through 27. And we see that Jesus is already hanging on the cross. He is already in agony. He has already endured the whipping. He's got the crown of thorns on his head. And it says that near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother there, so Jesus is hanging on the cross and he sees his mom there. There's my mom. The disciples have left me except for one. And I see him too. It's John. And he sees his mom and he sees his disciple whom he loved. And he says, "Dear woman, here is your son." He's not referring to himself. He's not saying, "Dear mom, look at me as I'm hanging on the cross." That's not what he's doing. He's saying, "Dear woman, John, over there, he's your son. John, here's your mother. I'm not going to be on this earth anymore. John, take care of her. Mom, rely on John." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. He made sure that she was taken care of, even though he was in the worst agony of his life, about to die. Even at the end, he's making sure that she's taken care of. And so we see Jesus in his example. May we too also live up to that example. And as I'm thinking about mothers, and I'm thinking about honoring our mothers, and I'm thinking about how our mothers have taught us in all of this, and I don't know exactly what all of our backgrounds are, I don't know exactly how you were raised and all of this kind of stuff, but one of the things that I do know, it says, honor your father and mother. And it doesn't say, honor your father and mother if they are a good mother or a good father. It says, honor your father and mother. We have a responsibility to our parents, however that is. And it may be in situations where there were some things going on that were not right. And in those situations, those children do have the need and the right to cut those ties. That is true. But there are so many people, so many parents who have tried to do the right thing. Maybe they weren't believers. Maybe they didn't know about the ways of God. Maybe all of that. But we still have the responsibility to honor our fathers and mothers. And I think that the way that we can do that the most is make sure that we are doing everything that we can to live as God wants us to. And the way that we do that is also by becoming God's children and doing that. And maybe there may be parents that won't understand that decision. But by choosing the right path, our parents would never be able to fault us. Our parents would never be able to say anything wrong about us being forever in heaven with God the Father. It is an honor and a glory to them, as well as to us. So if this is the day that you've decided that you want to become a Christian, we want you to do this for yourselves. We want you to make this decision for yourselves. If this is the day that you want to become a child of God, there is no time like the present. We have a baptistry that is open, and it is a watery grave. And in that grave, you can put yourself to death, and you will come up a new creature, being filled with the Holy Spirit to live a new life. And if you're out there online and you need to contact us in any way, I know that the phone number is scrolling underneath of our YouTube video. Please contact us. Let us know how we can help. If you have any other needs you need to make known, please come as we stand and sing this next song.